A quick note before you watch this video or listen to the audio podcast. This is an emotive subject and one that I had to change my perspective on while I exited Christianity. It is a journey that has forced me to face up to my own feelings, and it is for this reason that I open this episode with a deserved apology. The choke you hear is real. Additionally, and more importantly, at about the 1 hour mark, I clumsily use the phrase genuine women when referring to cis women. I hope it's obvious from the context what I mean and what my intention is, but that does not excuse using a phrase that devalues and delegitimizes my guest. I was wrong, and as you'll hear, I am graciously corrected. If cis people are to be allies in trans conversations, then it is essential that we educate ourselves in the language that we use. So please, when you hear me use that phrase, see it as an educational opportunity. And if it makes you flinch when I say it, then I apologise in advance. I too am learning to be better. With that said, here is my conversation with Lauren and David. This is a special episode. This will not have an episode number. I will insert this in just for context for everybody. This is Easter Monday. This is the Monday that Popery has croaked it, and we're talking about transgender issues. That's the day that we're recording this. What I've got at Still Unbelievable is I've got a series of episodes scheduled all to be published or to go live all the way for every 3 weeks or so, right away till the middle of July. What's going to happen is this episode is going to be inserted in front of all of those episodes. It'll have a bonus label. It will not have an episode number, and all of those episodes will be bumped back 1 or maybe 2 weeks. So that's the context of what's going on here. I've got David from Skeptics and Seekers here on the line. David, it's been a while since we've spoken, about 12 hours or something like that. So how are you, sir? Good day to you.
It's gasping for air. I can finally breathe again now that
Excellent.
12 hours has passed.
It's about 3:30 in the morning or something ridiculous like that where you are. I hope you've had a couple of ciders to wake you up.
A good cup of coffee in a styrofoam cup.
Ah, good for you. So good for you. It's before midday, so I'm drinking water, obviously. Excuse me.
If you say so.
And also on the line is Lauren. Now, Lauren, you did come in incognito on a very early episode of Still Unbelievable. You chatted to Andrew and myself for a little bit about Christianity and about trans and LGBT issues. Thank you for that conversation. It's been too long since we had that conversation with you. You and I have known each other or known of each other for around about 20 years. I was going back through documents. I think we very first met in 2003 at a go-karting event run by the fabulous track day company Booker-Track, and it was a go-karting event between various go-karts. And I don't have a photo of you from that event, but I have photos of other club participants from that event, and we all looked ridiculously young. But that's my first memory of meeting you. We are both fans of Japanese cars. You support the wrong car mark. I am obviously a major Honda fan. And in my photos there, this is hilarious, and this is nothing to do with the conversation we're going to have, but in my photos there, I've got a photo of the team results. And I was in team 4, and I think you were in a team called Track Day Queens, and you were the 5th place team. So there we go. From the very beginning, I am better than you. And we proved that not only do I like the better Japanese cars, but I'm a better karter, or at least my teammates were better than your teammates.
I think that's what happened, wasn't it?
That's probably what happened. Yes. So that's basically the setup. That's how far we go back. And for context for this conversation, I was very much a Christian at that time.
That's right, yeah.
I was a fundy-ish Christian. My attitude towards gender, my attitude towards same-sex attraction was regressive. It's probably the most polite way to express that. And I do know in those early years on public forums that you may not have seen at the time, but certainly probably saw later, I said unhelpful things. So I want to put it straight out there, because I've never had the opportunity to say this before, is I would like to apologise, because I owe it to you and I owe it to the trans community. I
thank
should
you.
not be tearing up. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So let's just get that one out of the way. From now on, we're friends. So I owe you, and I owe the community, and I do regret my past attitudes. It was attitudes I had because of the religion I was a part of. I can't entirely take that blame because I was taught how to think and I was taught how to believe. But that's how I was, and I'm a better person for it now, and I'm a better person in that aspect for having shed religion. So I now want to be an ally, and I now want to be a friend. So welcome to Still Unbelievable, Lauren.
Thank you, Matt. That's really appreciated, and yeah, I can tell it means a lot. And I think going back to those times though, there was a lot going on because I participated in Formula Women, didn't I? Which was an all-female racing series, and you would have known me then. And
I did enjoy watching that actually, and I was disappointed that it didn't run to another season, but I did enjoy that.
I mean, I think it's but my whole life was put out there, wasn't it, on national TV and the press, wasn't it? And I got a proper kicking. But people were different then, and I know that my previous I did a podcast about this last week, saying about how people were much more supportive, and there wasn't, any real criticism. They were just like, oh, okay, but and no real negativity. I think nowadays, if I was in an all-female series, they'll say that I shouldn't have a place in it. I think that's how attitudes have changed, But I don't want to go off on a tangent. I want you to, I guess, keep this on topic, I suppose.
Well, those things are relevant. And I think for you to say here and now that your experience, there were some rough things. There were some things said in more than one national paper. And I remember one specific national paper which was grotesquely unkind about you during that Formula Woman experience. But beyond that, I remember each of the women that were involved in this had a face interview, had a piece to camera, and you were open in that piece on camera where you said, I'm here, I'm Lauren, I'm a female driver, and I'm also trans. And you said that straight on national television, and there wasn't a big shock horror. If the same was to happen today, there would be. And that feels like, in one particular aspect, society has become a little bit more poisonous and a little bit more unfriendly. Maybe I should drop the word little from that. More poisonous and more unfriendly to people like yourself. And that feels sad. And again, I'm being really understated in that. That feels like a regression. That feels like more hatred. That feels like more fear. That feels like an unpleasantness in the atmosphere for people who simply want to exist. And I don't know how to express that in words beyond it's negative. I don't know how to express it any more than that.
Yeah, it's everything's become more toxic, and I think that there are a lot of people have suffered for that. I mean, generally, I'm okay. I've got a huge amount of support. I think in my day-to-day life, people don't really know I'm trans, so it's just kind of like crazy to think that I go to a trans protest in Manchester, and I ask to speak, and they say to me, "This is only for trans women to speak." It's like the ultimate faux pas, really, isn't it? But I just
you need two identities now. You need an identity that says I'm a woman, and now you need an identity that says I'm a trans woman, and you need to have one in each pocket.
I mean, I'm pretty open about it because I don't really care anymore. I think that I've been through the therapy and in more recent times, and I don't have the shame thing. I've dealt with all the trauma, so I feel like but as a technically a trans elder, somebody who officially transitioned 29 years ago, but really transitioned probably a bit more than that, more like about 31 years ago, is that if I don't say something for trans people, who are just trying to deal with their feelings now about who they are, then I'm not helping. And I think back in the day when I knew you, Matt, when I first met you in 2003, I've sat and people have made jokes about trans people in front of me, and I've said nothing because I didn't want to be pulled into that, or I didn't want to expose myself. It's crazy, isn't it?
It is. And it's nice to see the way attitudes have changed. And generally, because we both know mostly the same group of people in online motoring forum, and I like that group of people are all a very strongly supportive group of people, and I like that about them, and I like the way I had my own niggly bits with that same group of people from my Christian days. You were probably around, you probably saw those conversations.
Yeah, we used to rip you, didn't we?
Yes, you did.
We named a corner after you after Anglesey, didn't we?
We did.
Called it Limey. Church was called Limey.
Yes, you did. And I remember when that first appeared, I thought, oh, is that really necessary? And then I learned to roll with it. And it is funny. It's funny now. I look back at it humorously. But when I think back, when I thought it was a little bit niggly, I thought, and I think now, why? What was so fragile about my belief system that I felt niggled by that? Because it's crazy. For context, people, so that people understand, there's a racetrack in the UK which has a corner called Church, and because I was a resident Christian, this group of car club people, they changed in the car club discussions, they renamed this corner called Church to my online nickname, which was Limey. It's a tiny, tiny thing. There is no necessity whatsoever to take any kind of niggle from that. But my religious disposition at the time was so fragile that I was slightly niggled by it for a short period of time. David, it's about time you piped in, because Lauren and I obviously have history. You're new to this friendship, to this relationship, but you have your own thoughts. Would you like to pipe up?
Sure. And what a ridiculous question to ask, since you know me so well. I like to pipe up. I have a question, Lauren, and for me, it's just all questions, because it's fairly new to me, the whole trans thing. Granted, I've been a Christian forever. I've been an activist for a while, but even in evangelical Christianity, where I come from, and I'm 55 for context.
Okay.
Trans wasn't an issue. It hasn't been an issue that whole time. There have always been trans people.
Mm-hmm.
There have always been homosexual people. There have always been, these people have always been around. But that wasn't the focus of the church for a long time. It was just, oh yeah, those people over there doing that thing, you do you. And it's just been kind of recent in historical terms that suddenly this has become, the focal point of the church, and trans people have become a target. My own thoughts about this is that whenever an outgroup moves to assert their humanity and their equality, then they become a target. Then the majority becomes threatened, and the church has to kick in. But I would just ask you, who has a much better historical perspective, when did this become an issue for the church? You become public enemy number one, and what triggered it in your mind?
I think that I suppose my basis in answering that would be around what's happened in the UK. With I think if you go back to, I think it was about 2017, and there was the Mayor Forstater issue. Mayor Forstater is a woman who's a transphobic woman who initially lost, I think, and still lost a court battle over gender critical beliefs, which means she was dismissed from her work. But I think that people around her, I think the basis in all of this issue around being gender critical or transphobic stems a bit from religion, doesn't it? So I think it goes back to that issue of God created man and woman and all this kind of thing. I suppose that stuff that you have far more knowledge about than me, although I was a Christian when I was younger. But I think I think it was around 2017 that we started seeing this, but I don't know really why it became a thing for the church, I guess it's mobilizing people to more conservative views, isn't it? Is it around that? I'm not sure I'm really doing it justice to sort of trying to answer it.
My feelings on that is you're right about the conservative Christian aspect. It feels to me that Christianity has passed a threshold. Public Christianity has passed a threshold because there have been so many people leaving Christianity over the last 30 years, and those people have become louder and more noisier. And certainly in the last 10 years, you've got the explosions of podcasts like this one. And if you go and look for ex-Christian podcasts, there are lots of them. Lots of people with a voice making noise, lots of support groups with a voice. And I think what's happened is the amount of leavers has become so large that Christianity is feeling it. Christianity is noticing it. And what's happened is those that are left have ring-fenced themselves. They've put up a wall, and those that are left are the core. And what that means is the core or the most fundamental, all those people who are slightly more liberal, slightly more nuanced in their attitude towards other humans. Those are the ones that have left Christianity. The ones that are not leaving Christianity are the core, the fundy core. And so what's happened is what now remains of Christianity is mostly the highly conservative. And so they have now got more and more freedom to express their views. And certainly from me, who spends a lot of time looking at Christianity from the outside and critiquing Christianity, there have been a few people. In fact, a really good example of this is something that John Steingard, he's a former Christian musician. Andrew and I interviewed him here on Still Unbelievable around about lockdown time, about 3-4 years ago now. And he left Christianity, but he talked about a story of somebody he knew from the Christian music industry who made a comment on social media being pro same-sex marriage. And so he made an ally-ish comment, and then he got on the plane and did a 6 to 8 hour flight. By the time he landed, social media had wrecked the band, and that was it. That was the end of the band. I can't remember the name of the band, but this has happened. So what has happened in the last 15 years is Christians who have dared to be vocal initially on gay rights have suffered from the hands of their own kind. The core of Christianity has savaged Christians who wanted to be liberal, who wanted to be accepting, who wanted to be welcoming. And what I'm seeing now is more and more Christians with a platform are not talking about the LGBT issue. They're not talking about trans people. There are very, very few Christians who are openly talking in accepting terms on this issue, because their core base, the people they rely on, the people that fund their ministries, will just utterly destroy them if they do it.
I think thinking about the way that everything's going against trans people which is perpetuated by those evangelicals, is because we're such an easy target and we're easy to not. Yes. What's happened is that trans people don't have a voice. We're constantly not given a voice. We're not given, and if we are, we're only presented as trans activists, as some kind of militant group that are there to interfere in everybody's life and make it worse. So I think there's just anything that's presented, the media present is always bad trans. So it's always stuff that's in a negative way. Like, for example, if I give this example, after the court ruling on Wednesday, BBC News at 10 presented this thing about trans women like me, apparently no longer women. That's what they're doing in the Equality Act, And they presented as an example of a trans woman, Isla Bryson, who's a convicted rapist, and I would say a fake trans woman, but that's apparently acceptable to do that. So there's this terrible negativity that goes on, and and there's this fear mongering that happened as well, that for some reason that people think that trans women using, say, ladies' restrooms, should we say, or bathrooms in America or anywhere, in fact, propose some kind of like sexual predatory threat. We're only trans women there to threaten and endanger women. Where actually, what you're doing is victim blaming, isn't it? Because we're the ones that, ironically, I'm far more likely to suffer abuse than I have done. I was sexually exploited as a young adult. I was sexually abused as a child. It's all these things. And that's always by men. So, all I've ever been is a victim, and I was seriously assaulted a number of times. So I think the thing is this thing that trans women present a threat, which is what they present. You don't want your daughter going into a loo with a man who's dressed as a woman, but the thing is this thing is that they equate that trans women are men, and that's the problem. But now, because of the court ruling, I've noticed that the change in discourse in the press doesn't talk about us as trans women anymore. It refers to us as males and men. So it literally just does away with that. It's just, it's really bad. And all of this stuff then makes people think, oh, well, if trans women are men, because a court judgment is saying that, then therefore we can't have men. Do you see what I mean? It's easy. And I don't know if I've gone a bit tangentially because I'm a bit passionate about it, David, and I do apologise. But I think that a lot of that negative stuff, it's so that's what they've done, isn't it, in America? They've used the sport angle as well. And, I've got lots I could say about that. But
all tangents are welcome, and you don't need to apologise for any of them.
Especially to me.
Okay. Okay, but there's probably said a lot there because I do go on, but it is a real issue, isn't it? That thing of that the church say, well, this is a group that this is against God's teachings. They change their body, they cut things off, stick things in. They're a danger to your children. They're a danger. Trans women are a danger to women and girls. That's what they perpetuate. I have a good friend of mine, a business partner, who's a trans man. It's like they don't even figure, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a bit weird that it really is a misogynistic world that we're living in, and misogyny feels like it's got worse. The ridiculous irony in all this, Lauren, is that a woman going into a bar is more at risk from the straight Russell Brand at the bar offering to buy them a drink than they are from the trans person they might bump into in the toilets.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is that actually, the vulnerability lays more with the trans women. And I think I'm probably more vulnerable than cis women are anyway, by nature of being trans. And that's the problem, isn't it, to an extent? It's because I'm somehow now being treated as less human, So
it's crazy. And I'm quite horrified by this whole language of, oh, we must protect us delicate white women. Really? The people that you're ejecting from the ladies' bathroom are going to be 4 times, 5 times, 10 times more at risk if you force them into the men's toilet. Let's be absolutely brutal about that. Yeah, this is, and they're not even a threat to you. And if your fear is a man putting on a dress for opportunity, then your target is the wrong person.
Well, let me just say on the whole bathroom front, because I was an athlete since I was a kid, and so locker rooms are, I grew up, getting naked in locker rooms, around other people. That just becomes a thing. You don't even think about it after a while. But at some point you grow up and you realize, oh, there are gay people. So if your fear is that someone in a changing room situation who is of the same sex might see your junk and pop a boner, it's just stupid. It honestly is, because they're in the locker room for the same reason that you're in the locker room. And nobody is, life is not a porn movie. It just, we're there to change out of your clothes, get a shower, and get on with your life. And at some point, athletes, in particular, that's a group that just doesn't give a shit. And in the real world, that's always a possibility. You could always run into a violent homosexual, whether male or female, who, society would say, oh yeah, they belong in that bathroom. But they don't think about that when it comes to the trans issue. The trans is just a visible person that they can target. And I think the whole bathroom safety issue is just a smokescreen for trans bigotry. Because that issue, if that's really what they cared about, has always existed and they know it. So it's not the issue. It's never been the issue. And, it's just an excuse to be against this group that is all of a sudden trying to assert their humanity.
I mean, I mean, absolutely, I agree. And I think that the other thing is as well is, I go into a loo, a bathroom, should we call it? And I go in a locked cubicle, go to the loo, go out, wash my hands, whatever, check my face, etc. Maybe have a chat. I don't know. It's but the thing is that that's all it is, right? So and the other thing I would say sort of about it is that for me is a safe space. I feel like, well, men aren't going to come in there, so it's safe. If I'm having a man harassing me in a club, how many times have I used the ladies' restroom as an oasis? Get my mate and come in and we work out a plan to what we're going to do. That was years ago when I was young. But I think the other thing is as well is that obviously any trans woman has at some point, it's at some point they're pre-operative, they're pre-surgery and stuff, and I think any trans woman would be absolutely mortified if anyone should see them in any way naked or their genitals, and I would certainly absolutely agree that when I used to go to, well, we're going back a very long time ago now, but if I went to events or I knew I was going to be away, I'd have to check the facilities before that they were okay for me, that it was going to be safe for me, that obviously I would, could be able to shower in if I had to share sort of areas. I had to make sure everything had locks on the doors and stuff like that, because that's for me, not for do you see what I mean? It's that thing of feeling really self-conscious and really worried about things like that it's going to be a safe place. That the last thing ever, you just die, wouldn't you? That's how it would make me feel. I mean, and nowadays, 25 years post-surgery, I don't really, I don't go around. I think I've showered in a group setting with other women at Formula Women in 2004 because I had no option, but it didn't really matter, did it? So, but it's not something I try and seek out to do, is it? Why would I do that?
No,
That would just seem a bit weird, wouldn't it?
It does. And there's a despicable theme that I'm seeing here through the whole. I'm old enough to remember the AIDS scare of the 1980s.
Yeah.
And that was blamed almost exclusively on homosexual men. Yes, it did appear to be more prevalent in those communities, but it wasn't unique to those communities, but they got all the blame, and then that's then transformed into a lot of anti-gay rhetoric in the Christian community, and that spread into homosexual people clearly want to get access to our children, and there was the
paedophile link.
And I still see it today. I absolutely do see this link between homosexual men and paedophiles, which is the most bizarre link. There is no real evidence that actually makes that connection, unless you want to say that 90% of Catholic priests are homosexual men. Have fun with that one. It really is bizarre. And now I'm seeing a very similar rhetoric to the trans community. Yes. Trans women are simply men in a dress who want access to children, and
the whole purpose is to do that. That's why they do it, isn't it?
It's utterly horrific, and I'm just and it's coming from the same people, and it's coming from the deeply religious community. And what that points to me, I think that's telling of a bigger story. I mean, this is horrific anyway. This is what we're talking about, but I think there's a bigger picture around this. Is that conservative Christian community is notorious for science denial. They do not take They do not look at evidence. They do not look at nuance. They just look at their well-thumbed, red-lined holy book, and they interpret that how they want to, so that they can have control and they can manipulate and hate particular people, and they use whatever they can, and they are not nuanced in their scientific rhetoric. And I think that's the scenario that this kind of language comes out, and it's poisonous in it, and it hurts society. So anyway, what I would like to move on to, David, unless you want to interrupt with a point, is I'd like to talk about
just one quick one. One quick one. It takes 10 seconds. I have been seeing a change in the language, or an addition to the language, not just that trans people are trying to sexually assault your children, but that because trans people cannot procreate, they want to procreate by changing your children. That's kind of the new line
So they're going to
coming
make
out
more
of
trans people like you, kind
exactly.
of like, okay,
Yeah.
so it's the contagion thing, is it?
Let's sit on that one for a bit before we take my question.
But indoctrination, isn't it? It's a bit like the church, yeah. It's that's what they're kind of using, that same kind of rhetoric in a way, which is a bit weird. But
let's make a very serious point here. Letting children know that trans people exist is not equivalent to trying to make your children trans. Let's make that point clear. And in case you didn't hear it at the back, just letting your children know that these people exist is not equivalent to try to pervert your children. They are not the same thing. We're just trying to make your children better humans so they can see that other people exist and they are different. Vive la différence. So let's put that one to bed then. Lauren, why do children have nothing to fear from you?
Because I'm not a threat. But simply, I think the problem is as well is this aspect of saying about people thinking that children could be influenced by me to be trans. Who in their right mind will want to be trans? Like, it's just a nightmare, isn't it? Really, it's that's what nobody seems to really think about. It's like, let's just think how long it takes to go through that process, how difficult it is to do. I don't want any, prizes for that, but I think that the problem is that there's surgeries, there's hormones, there's it turns your life upside down, all those things, that you have to do. And all that gatekeeping you have to go through, and it's really difficult. I'm not a threat to children. In fact, I'm a social worker, aren't I? I've safeguarded children for 18 years nearly. So the point is, I suppose I want to, maybe we should talk more about why I could be considered a threat, because I don't understand it.
Yes, that was the question I wanted to ask earlier. So because a lot of the language that I'm seeing is we're seeing privileged, mostly white, cis women saying, we don't want people who are different from me in my bathroom because I feel threatened. So let's answer that question for it. Why would a cis, straight, white, middle-class woman be threatened by you going into a bathroom?
Well, they wouldn't, and because I don't know how to really say it, other than I'm not being a threat, because all I want to do is go to the bathroom for the same reasons they do, right?
Mm-hmm.
To use the toilet, to do that, and quite often, I will just go to the toilet like everyone does. You come out, you wash your hands, you check your face, or sometimes I might have a conversation with this lady's Liz. It's what happens. People talk to each other, and especially if you've probably had a few drinks. But I mean, it's just social etiquette, I suppose. But I can't see how any of that qualifies me as a threat. I don't know. I mean, I suppose I'm just trying to. It's one of those things that I've done a million times, isn't it? In the last over 30 years.
Yeah, I'm trying to pinpoint where this
I'm trying to pinpoint where the threat is.
Where the threat is coming from, because there's definitely a perceived threat in the language.
Is it that I'm going to sexually assault?
But is it a real threat? I'm not seeing how it can be a genuine threat, but there is definitely this sense of perceived threat, and I think it's manufactured. And I think
it is completely manufactured. It is completely
It's that I go
manufactured.
in there to look at women, do I, like coming in and out of toilet cubicles, because that would be really exciting. I just,
zero people are going to the bathrooms,
no, it
you know,
doesn't happen, does it?
to see people with full bladders. This is nonsense. And if we just back step one little back step, and Christians can do this on their own, just look at the statistics and realize their kids are in way more danger from cis hetero males.
Yeah.
That's they way more danger per capita. You can chop it up any way you want to. It's just that from the Christian perspective, the only way they talk about trans people, LGBTQ plus people, the only way they talk about them is in a negative term. So the only news they give about them is when a trans person does something bad. And guess what? Trans people are people. They're complete people. They do bad things just like heterosexuals do. It's like the immigration issue in America. The only time you hear about Haitians is when they've attacked a white person. That's it.
Yeah.
And so the narrative becomes these immigrants have to be deported because they're all bad. That's how Christians view it. Even as far back as ancient Judaism, the Canaanites, they had to be completely wiped out because they're all bad. The earth had to be completely wiped out because they were all bad. Enemies of God in Sodom and Gomorrah, they were all bad. It's kind of this all or nothing mentality. And so if they want to have a durable enemy, and trans is it for now, they are all bad. And so the only thing they talk about are news items or things that's bad. And so that's how you get that perspective that, oh, well, the only time I ever hear about these are when they're, doing something bad.
It's the
These are
bad
bad people.
trans again, isn't it? The bad trans, that's it. We don't hear about the good trans, do we? People don't want to hear about that. And it's not in the rhetoric, it's not allowed, is it? So it's all of that, isn't it? And that's how they build these it's a complete myth that trans women are a threat, especially to children.
Yeah.
Which
there's a tiny little bit of, I know it's not great, but there is a tiny little bit of hope in all this that we've talked about. And if I can again frame it by talking about the past again, Christians, we're talking about these conservative core group of funded Christians, they have lost the fight against homosexual people. More and more churches are accepting same-sex attracted people into their midst. Not just that, they're actively blessing same-sex unions. They are even going so far as accepting same-sex attracted people into their leadership as priests, etc. The Christians who are anti the gay community have lost that fight. So those who are still in that cohort, who are still anti anything that's not the conforming sexuality that they desire, they've looked for a new demon, and it's deeply regrettable that demon is the LGBTQ trans community. And and so they are now the target. And what's really, really disgusting about this is they are such a tiny minority, less than 1% of our population.
Yeah.
The gay community is around about, what, 10% or something like
10%,
that?
Yeah.
And the numbers are just too big for these Christians to actually have any impact on them, because once you boil the population down to just those fundy Christians, they're probably not much more than 10% themselves anyway. Probably even less. They are a noisy minority, but sadly, they also have power and clout behind their noise. So what they've done is they've focused on a target that they can make an impact on, and it's a tiny sub 1% of our population who are trans. And I think it's despicable that people like this will shift their blame and shift their focus onto such a small part of our community who are vulnerable and do need community success. So moving on to that, Lauren, because some of the things that we've talked about in the lead up to this is what can the wider population do? Because I've made the point that you guys are less than 1%. Even talking about trans people, does that run a risk of creating a division? Does that run the risk of saying you are different from me? Do we need to change our language so that it's more inclusive, so that people see you and me as the same, not different? And what can people like David and myself do to make life more comfortable for the sub 1% who are being targeted in this way?
I mean, I think firstly, because we're so few, we're such an easy target, and I think also we're misunderstood. You know, people said, well, you know, I always say to people, "Oh, well, I am who I am, and I've had to do what I've had to do because I had no choice," you know, and it's pretty drastic, I suppose you could say. But that's the only way I could live my life and have a happy life, you know. Here I sit, I'm married to, I have a husband, you know Mark. So
Yes, I do.
it's I've been with him 23 years next month. But I think the thing, what can we do? What should we be different? I think that my perspective is going to differ because of my experiences.
Mm.
And you know, that's if you ever see a series called there's a really excellent series about trans women called Pose, that was made in America, and it's very, you know, brilliant for illustrating that. I think as a trans woman, we all always have the same story. Basically, we get beaten up, kicked out, you know, and then we have to kind of like sort our lives out with no support, and we get a lot of abuse. So I think what you could do to support it, because we're such a small group, I always say to people, be an ally. Wear the lanyard. You know, when somebody says that, makes a joke about trans people, challenge them. Say something about it and say, hang on a second. I've got a friend of mine. She's called Lauren. She's trans. I know all about it because she's spoken to me about it. We've had general conversations about it, and you're absolutely wrong. It's not like that. And I think what we've got to do is challenge it, because the only way that we will, as a group, survive is if cis people stand up and call it out. You know, call out transphobia. At the rallies, I was there. My husband was there. Half my roller derby team were there, who are mostly who are cis women. Some were heterosexual, some aren't. So they're actually some non-binary people who play in roller derby, but they were there, and we all stood together. And that's the key, isn't it? Always, we've got to stand together, because otherwise, divided we fall. And at the moment, what's happening is that trans people are being divided. I've now been separated from other women by so-called apparent feminists. You can't be a feminist if you attack trans people. It's just, by definition, makes no sense. So I think that is something we really need to think about. And these apparent feminists, you know, who were cheering up, jumping up and down outside the court, well, really, all you've done is kicked your own goose, because they're going to go for women's rights, and that's already happening in America with Roe versus Wade, abortion, etc. And then gay rights will come as well. So that's the problem. So it's just they haven't thought about it. They're not clever.
I don't think they have. I think there's going to be a terrible sting in the tail of this thing. So just for context, listeners, we are talking about the Scottish High Court that this week here in the UK ruled that women's places are for biological women only. The full text of that document, because it is publicly available, will be in my show notes. Check my show notes. You can go and have a look at that, read the full thing. I've also found at least one page where there's a legal commentary on that. It's worth reading the legal commentary, because when I tried to read some of the key paragraphs of that document, they're legalese. I am not a legalese expert, and there was one that I had to read multiple times, and I still didn't understand what it was saying, even though I understood each of the words that was in it. I asked AI to explain it, which helped me a great deal, and it was really interesting what Copilot came out when I asked it to explain that paragraph to me. For example, there was one paragraph I was really struggling to read, and what Copilot told me what that paragraph said was the paragraph recognized that there was a discrepancy between the legal definition of a biological woman and the expression of protections from the Discrimination Act, and those two, then that literal reading of those two things conflicted and cause a problem, and that places needed to solve that. So this document is not a clear-cut case. This document does not solve a lot of issues, and there are going to be things that ripple out of this which are going to need further decisions. So do not take this document, do not take this cheering from this decision as being an absolute win, because it is absolutely not. There is a lot of ambiguity. There is a lot of clarity that is lacking. There is a lot of contradiction and discrepancy, and there is a lot of stuff that needs to come out of this. And if you come out of this being a dick, you are the problem. So, Lauren, this whole focus is around bathrooms, which is, I think, highly unfortunate. It really is the one place where this should not be focused. But some of the commentary that I've seen around bathrooms is we're going to now have situations where some people take it upon themselves to police who does and who doesn't go into a women's bathroom. Do you think this is a genuine concern? Do you think this is actually something that will genuinely happen?
I think it is. I'm anxious about what's going to happen next week, really, because I'm not at work today. I go back to work tomorrow, but I'm anxious about kind of the way that this ruling has been interpreted. And I think that those crazy people, women jumping up and down outside the court, and people like Krishna Faulkner, the HRC chair, seem to think that this ruling means that you can exclude trans women from bathrooms, from female bathrooms, when in actual fact, the irony is that in the equality law, the only thing that's actually changed is there are, if we take just trans women, so that's those with gender recognition certificates, probably around about 4,000 of us. I've had one since it was possible, so for 20 years, and I was fast tracked for it because I qualified for it years before it even came into existence back in the 90s. So, and that gender recognition certificate gave me all my legal rights as a woman, my acquired gender, and now they've changed it so that I'm no longer a woman according to the Equality Act. The Equality Act used to, before the court ruling, said what was on your birth certificate is how you're treated as in your sex in law. So that meant that trans women without a gender recognition certificate, and therefore a corrected birth certificate, was still treated as a man, whereas for me it was different. So that's what they've changed, but it doesn't mean that you're then automatically excluding trans women from female spaces, because it has to be a legitimate and proportionate aim. And I would argue that obviously going to using a female bathroom where I go into a locked cubicle, as you know, that's how these things are, right? They're not communal. It's no threat at all. We've had this discussion, haven't we? But I do think, will people do that? I think there is an interpretation, like, for example, the British Transport Police have said that now that I will be, if I was to be searched, I'll be searched by a male officer. But you know, that takes into no account that I have breasts, I have a vagina. You know, it's not really, it doesn't seem very appropriate, does it? It seems like a license for sexual assault, in my opinion.
I'm quite
potentially.
horrified by that prospect, and I'm not even going to be a victim of that. And I find those words that you've said have made my skin crawl. I just can't imagine. I'm sorry, I'm lost for words. David?
Yeah. How do you enforce the law?
The other thing, David, as well, of course, thinking about this is that the problem is how do you police this? Because you know, I've never ever had someone say to me, "Are you a trans woman in the loo?"
Right.
You know, it's never happened.
It's not altogether obvious in many cases.
No.
You know, if I don't know if this is a really bad term in this community, but I'm ignorant, and so I'm willing to learn, but I'm also willing to fumble through it. If you've ever seen a Thai ladyboy, you are you have no idea what you're looking at. And I'm just gonna say it that way. And there are lots of trans people who they're just flat out cross dressers who are so good. They're not even trans or gay or anything, but they're so good you don't know.
Yeah.
And so I have no idea how this would be enforced. I mean, does someone in a restroom say, "Hey, there's someone in here who looks like they might be trans," and who do they report that to? And then what does that person do? What is it?
Yeah.
It seems so absurd to me. What the hell do you do? How do you enforce that?
If
I mean,
British
there's another
Transport,
issue.
if
Go
British
on, sorry.
Transport Police are actually serious about this, and I will try
It's
and look up, and
It's
if I
been
find
reported
it,
in the news. Yeah.
has it? Okay, check the show notes. I don't have a link to me right now, but obviously through the edit, because this will be
I
out
can
for in a
give you
couple of
one.
days. Thank you, Lon. Check the show notes for a link to that, because if they are actually serious about that, it'll be in the news that they have gone and stopped a genuine woman who looks just a little bit macho, and that'll be the Daily Mail headline, and that will happen. My prediction is that will happen before they've done that to a genuine trans person, and that will happen before this summer is out. My birthday's in September. I'm promising you that headline will happen before my birthday this year.
Yeah. You've got this issue, haven't you, where actually what's going to happen is though, so I'm fairly feminine in my how I present, there's no ambiguity. I'm not androgynous at all, but there are women that are cis women, and they're the ones that are going to get then challenged, aren't they? And we've seen this in America already, haven't we? So
Yeah.
I'm aware of that.
Yes, it's going to be a nightmare, and it's going to backfire horrifically. And my only hope is that enough genuine women get caught up in this. Sorry, let me just make it. I am not wishing anything bad on genuine women, but I do hope that enough genuine women get caught up on the wrong side of this, that people realize, oh, hang on a minute, we've really cocked up here. We need to take a step back, and we need to be less shitty. That is my hope.
Could I say, is it better to use the term cisgender rather than genuine, as it kind of implies that
Probably.
I'm not genuine?
I am not familiar with the right kind of words to use. I apologise,
Well,
Lauren, and that's part of my education here.
That's okay. I think the problem is that really that this ruling takes away some of my validity as a woman, doesn't it?
Yes.
Whereas, I could say prior to Wednesday, well, I'm legal for all intents and purposes, according to law, I'm a woman. I've gone through all this process. It's a recognised medical condition. I've been through all the treatment. I can't do anything more. It's and I've lived my life fully as a woman for more than half my life. 29 years. It's quite a long time. So,
hey, Matt, I'm sorry. I've got to check out here pretty quick. And so I know I've interrupted here, but I'd like to say one more thing before I check out. And so if you can cue me in for that, I've got this other thing that I've got to do a little bit more prep
David,
for.
Then you go and do your thing, and Lauren and I will tidy up.
All right. Yeah, sorry about that. So the thing that has been bouncing around in my mind, and I do want to stick around long enough to hear Lauren's response to this, because like I said earlier, I'm just a dumb clod who's who's figuring this out now. But it seems to me that trans have been around for a long time, and I also think that trans is maybe a little bit of a misnomer. It's a badge that trans people didn't give themselves. And so anytime you have a situation like that, it's always going to be a little bit of a misnomer. Lauren, I suspect you were trans long before you, had transition surgery. You were trans long before you were, you put on a dress. You were trans. It's like being homosexual. You're homosexual long before you ever ask a person of the same sex out on a date. You were left-handed long before anyone noticed and tried to make you right-handed. And so there's a biological component here that is kind of being denied with the word trans itself, because it suggests that you are making a conscious choice to stop being the thing that God created you and being this other thing. And the fact is, it's a recognition. And sometimes it's a quick recognition when you're very young. Sometimes it's a slow recognition over time. It's a recognition of what you actually are. You're not transing anything. And so I just want to say to people that maybe the problem here is visibility, or at least that's part of the problem. We used to say, there's only 1% gay people in the world. That wasn't true. There's only 5% gay people in the world. That wasn't true either. And now, we can say, well, there's about 10% gay people. I'm not even sure that's true. It's just a matter of visibility. They're more visible now, way more visible, and we have to acknowledge them. And I think that has to happen with the uh, air quotes trans community. You exist. You're out there, and you were out there long before anyone knew it, maybe even before you knew it. And so I would love to see a little bit better branding than that, and a little bit more biological awareness that what you are and what other, again in air quotes, trans people are, is what they have always been. And the only thing that's transitioned is our recognition of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, actually. I mean, obviously, I would say, obviously, I was born the way I am, really, and and I knew from an early age, like most trans people will tell you, and most gay people will tell you. I think actually, what's interesting is the change in the language, that we had this thing where we use this term transgender, where when I was diagnosed, my record still says it on the NHS that diagnosed me as transsexual, because people seem to know the difference between people who were transsexual and people who would cross dress, etc. And there's always a spectrum of these things, but there would be quite a notable difference. But I found that in the 90s, when I would always, if I had to say what I was, I would say I was a transsexual back then, and people knew what that meant. That meant that you were going to have surgery, you were going to go through this process, that you were, you don't want to use the term born in the wrong body, because I think it's really simplistic, but this thing where, they could see that something was obviously wrong from a young childhood age, and you'll be treated for a medical condition that's been well documented for a good 100 years, really. If we go back to Max Hirschfeld and Berlin, before the Nazis wiped out the trans people in the Holocaust, and did all of that. So I think I think you're right, that there's an issue, isn't there, around this thing that we're trans, that we're making a choice to do this. I mean, if we're in the right mind, we make a choice to do all the things I've done to be myself. I mean, it's pretty intense, isn't it, really? I nearly died in surgery. I was very ill. I had some really bad complications. I came through it all, but it was super tough. But and also all the social issues around, you know, having family members that still don't talk to me, 30 years later. It's crap like that, isn't it? And the abuse you get, and as a child, just being terrorized by boys beating me up because I wasn't like them. It's sort of, so I think the thing is around this issue around all of it, is that nobody would choose to do that, would they?
No.
And nobody would want that. And like my friend who's gay says to me, he says, God, why would anyone want to be gay? You've got to be mad. He said, let alone be trans. He said, you're another level.
Yeah.
But it's true, isn't it? I think. Does that make sense?
It does. And thank you so much for answering
You're
my
welcome.
questions, because I recognize that, they're all ignorant questions. I've been an American
It's okay.
evangelical for the first half of my life, and this simply wasn't an issue until my later time in the church and through most of my atheism. So I appreciate that. And for any trans people out there, or gay people out there, if I've used the wrong term, which I'm sure I have, it's not intentional. And so thank you so much. I do have to run, though, and I really appreciate having been here.
Okay. Cheers, David. Talk to you again soon.
You're welcome. Nice to meet you.
Right. So let's polish one thing off first, then, Lauren. Now that David's, I used some clumsy language 5-10 minutes ago. I apologise for that. I used language that I'm comfortable with to express something that you knew what I meant. But this is an important point. If I'm going to be a genuine ally, I need to use the right language to talk about people. And using the language that I did, genuine woman, is clumsy. it's inaccurate, and it risks offence. So how should I use phrases like that? What are the right words that somebody like me who needs to be an ally use?
I think really, if we're going to use trans as a word, then we would apply if we're talking about women who's not trans. I would say they're cis,
Okay.
you know, which is Latin, isn't it? I mean, it's just
Yeah.
basic stuff, really. I mean, in that, I think that's better, because the problem we've got at the moment, especially with since this ruling, is that I commented on Blue Sky this morning that all the discourse I'm reading, like I said earlier, is that they used to refer to us as trans women. Now they refer to us just as males or men. So there's a
Yeah.
change in discourse that attacks our validity, and people are saying, "Well, you're not a woman, you're a man." But what? It's that thing, isn't it? Where it's taking away my validity. So I think, obviously, if we use terms like genuine, it then infers
It
I'm not
fuels
genuine.
that. Yeah. It
Yes,
fuels that.
that's why I think.
Okay. So cis woman or trans woman are acceptable terms that you
Yes,
would recognise.
I
Okay,
can, yeah,
but we
that's
can
it.
just drop those and say you're a woman. But the reason why I used the language I did was to differentiate in the transport police example that we're talking about. But when there isn't a necessity to differentiate, you're a woman. So, but I think you made the point about that change of the language. The change of the language has become more combative, and that, I think that's intentionally so. It's with the intention,
offensive, isn't it?
yeah, it's with the intention of devaluing you. So that makes it even more important that your allies combat that. So you said earlier that we should challenge that. So if I see somebody on social media, it doesn't matter whether it's Twitter or any other social media place, and I see somebody describing trans women as men, I need to combat that. I need to say they're women.
Because men wouldn't do what I've done, would they? That's the point, you know. And I think there must be a difference, therefore, that is pretty obvious if people really just thought about it for a minute.
Yeah,
that's what I would say.
Just for a bit of light amusement, I'm in a play. You know that acting is the hobby thing I do, and just out of pure coincidence, the character that I am playing in the play has to put on a skirt and has to be a female vicar for half of the play. So I have to experience being on stage in tights and a short skirt. When I say short skirt, I mean it stops halfway down my thighs. It is obscene. And I'll be straight up and honest, I have never in my life stood on stage and felt so vulnerable.
Really? I mean, isn't that interesting?
It really is, because I feel naked below my waist. There is a comfort in wearing trousers. You feel the thickness of the material on your legs. When it's just tights, it feels like it feels naked. There's not a lot there, and it feels skirt. And yes, there's because of the context, there's the obvious drama-related jokes all around that, etc. But genuinely, it feels uncomfortable for me. I feel vulnerable. I feel undressed. I feel half-dressed. It's a very strange thing. And I mentioned that to a couple of women, and they both said, now you know what it's like for us.
Yeah.
Every fucking day.
Because you do feel more exposed, don't you? And that's it. That's the thing, isn't it? You know, you sit there, you cross your legs, you do all those things. You know, when I do wear, you know, dresses in the summer, I love my summer dresses. But I mean, but obviously I've worn dresses and skirts for decades and decades. But I mean, it's there is that point of it, isn't it? You know, and in heels as well, you know, you can't get away as quickly, can you?
No,
so there's a vulnerability there.
I have to do this in heels as well. I mean, they're small. Okay. They're an inch high. So I mean, I know the ladies watching this are going, inch high heels. What's your problem?
It's nothing.
Dude,
3 or 4 inches.
Yeah. You know, I have no lived experience in walking like that, so I'm walking around on my tiptoes. It's a new experience for me. It might not be for everyone. And on my knee, I am so conscious about where my knees are. It's really, really strange. So hopefully that gives me a bit of an experience of what it's like to be a woman. Hopefully that gives me more appreciation of the vulnerability that women have to deal with on a daily basis that men don't even think about ever.
I was going to say, Matt, go on. So I was going to say, the other thing is about the sexist and the misogyny as well. You know, that's something you wouldn't have experienced, but that's something that's, you know, very real, isn't it? In all of this.
But you made a point earlier about why would somebody do this? People don't do this for a whim. People absolutely don't do it for a cheap thrill. This is not a sexual thing that you're doing. So let's just try and get that one out of the way. There's something else that I also, although I've not seen it as part of the dialogue that we've had in the last 4 weeks, but I do see it from certain Christian platforms, and that is this whole thing about the detransitioners. There are a tiny minority of transitioners who have years later said, I made a mistake. This should not have happened. I want to revert. And those people are being platformed also as a way to delegitimize your experience. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that, because the existence of a detransitioner should not be used to devalue those who need to transition. But the question I'd like to ask is, how do we care for those people as well? And yes, and how do we filter those? Is there a way in, because you've said that you know the experience, the process in far more detail than I do. I'm not asking for all the details, but is there a way through that process that these people who are at risk of detransitioning being picked up, or is that simply something that we have to accept will happen?
I think there's an aspect of the laws of infinity applying in terms of probability, that there's always going to be somebody who transitions and shouldn't have transitioned. So it's going to happen sometime somewhere. I think that that there's a huge amount of gatekeeping there. I think the public fear is that children, as President Trump said, there are children going to school and they're coming back without having operations, you know.
Yeah, for the record, that's bullshit.
That is bullshit. Because the reality is that, you know, and I've got friends who have got trans children that I speak about quite regularly with them to support them, and if there's one thing they can't access, it's actually services, because it's in such disarray. You know, the waiting times are so long. West Streeton has banned puberty blockers, so and cross-sex hormones is getting pretty difficult. You're supposed to be 16 before you can do that. So there's all this issue where no trans child will now be prevented from going through puberty they don't want to go through, and they'll have to go through that hell. But I think the detransitioners, the people that they've gone through the gatekeeping, they've spoken to. You have 2 psychiatrists that you see, so who. My experience was that they were very, they present to you, they kind of have a feeling of indifference. So you have to kind of convince them, really, and they will try to talk you out of it many a time. You know, for at least the first few visits, you generally get one that plays nice and one that doesn't, and that was my experience. So I think the thing is that I know people like, you know, I'm immediately thinking of Kira Bell, who you know, went through some surgeries and stuff before then detransitioning. I think there's this issue, isn't there, around all of that, where you think you must have then lied to the people that are treating you to get in that position, really, to get that far along. And I think that's an issue, or maybe it's delusion. But for people that detransition, yes, okay, you know, there's no point, is there? Nobody is pushed through any of this. You know, in fact, I had to be so determined to get through it when I was at Charing Cross, and when I was seeing, you know, having all the consultations. I kept moaning about it. I had to do this, I had to do that. It was really difficult, really, and frustrating for me. But I think for those detransitioners, they've got to be supported, and I have no problem. You know, I just think you've got to do the what's right for you, haven't you? You know, it's about accepting that the low number of people that make this mistake seem to present as having gender dysphoria when in fact it's something else.
Mhm.
It's possible because, you know, the head's a complex place. And if you have other issues as well, that can be
Yeah.
problematic, can't it, in making a diagnosis?
Yeah.
Um,
You used the word there, gender dysphoria,
mhm.
which I understand is a recognised what's the word? I don't know what the right word to use is, but it's a recognised condition, or at least it's a word that's used. Is there a risk though that that word and the language around that word, is there a risk that that makes the whole thing a psychological issue rather than a physical issue? And because I definitely see some comments, and I'm kind of reluctant to go down this road because I'm not sure it's helpful,
Okay.
but there is certainly an element, and I see it a lot, and again, specifically from the kind of people that we've been talking about and criticizing all the way through for the past hour, is they see it as just a psychological issue and have a couple of rounds of counselling and you'll be cured of it and that'll be sorted.
Yeah, it's a mental disorder, is what you're saying, isn't
Yeah.
it? But it's been declassified, hasn't it? I mean, the problem is when I had my diagnosis was gender identity disorder. So the
Mhm.
trouble is, every time you got a disorder, people say you're mentally ill, you know,
Yeah.
which kind of follows, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But now they say gender dysphoria because it's a, you know,
Mhm.
it's not a disorder; it's just a medical condition. But yeah, I think this is why in the UK they still haven't banned conversion therapy.
Mhm.
Yet we've been waiting years for this to happen.
Yeah,
About
that's overdue. Come on, UK government, you need to do something
It's
about
so
that.
bad. It's damaging people, you know, this thing that's perpetuated, and I know you're going to agree with this, it's perpetuated by Christians, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's by that. It's all of that.
It's a
We'll
theme we're
save
going
you.
through here, isn't it?
Yes, it is a thing. And we will save you, you know, you just need to
Mm.
find the light. Um, but yeah, I think it's extremely difficult with that when people say that you can't. I had counselling, I had everybody try and talk me out of it. Um, And whether it's family, friends, I had threats, you know, not to do anything because my family would disown me, you know, and some of them did. But but even so, I was just like, well, what can I do then? You know, I have to do this. I have no choice. Otherwise, I'm going to just kill myself. So that's the problem, isn't it? That's it.
Yeah.
It gets desperate. I think when you've got people in desperate situations, it's also they're very vulnerable, aren't they? You know,
Yeah.
and I was very vulnerable. I was exploited, you know, by men
Mm.
at age 22 in clubs in Earls Court and businessmen and stuff, you know, because I didn't have anything. I was homeless and stuff like that. So I think there's all the thing. I don't know if it's not trying to get into my story here, but I think it kind of illustrates kind of how it can be at the point of presentation because you get to a point of presentation, your mental health's going to be at a extreme low, isn't it? Because you get to a point where you go like, okay, I'm broken. I have to do something.
Yes.
And that's an
I,
issue.
yes. And so going back to the earlier question of, you know, you used the word gatekeeping. About, you know, there needs to be protections, but there has to be a limit. At some point, you need to accept that this is an individual that needs to transition. Because
Yes.
if you gatekeep so much, you'll end up not transitioning anybody. And that's the only way to guarantee that there's going to be no detransitioners. And then what you've done is you've just made everything bad for everybody, which doesn't help. So yeah, there needs to be a point at which you go, okay, this person needs to transition. And yes, there will be some people who go past that point and then find, oh, actually, this hasn't really solved whatever it was.
So
But they are
can I add a
not a,
point?
yeah.
Can I just add a point though? So I don't mean to interrupt. It's that when I was told, right? So like for example, I was told on my first appointment, they said, well, okay, we'll go to uni and transition. We're not going to give you any hormones. and I think and I think when people socially transition, you know pretty quickly really whether that's going to be the right thing for you
Mm,
because of how it changes things. And in some ways for me, obviously it made my life harder in that I've got lots
yeah.
of difficulties with how people treated me, but actually in myself, I felt a lot better.
Mhm.
And as I was able to progress through that, it was like the clouds parted and there was blue
Yeah.
skies. I know it's going to sound all like really
Mm,
beautiful and everything, but for me, it felt like my head cleared and I had this thing that I wasn't having to deal with anymore. This dysphoria of just just having to sign. It was like I was putting on an act before. And
Wow.
I think that when people, it does surprise me a bit that someone could socially transition for 4 years or something and then detransition. So they're taking that long to really work that out.
Yeah,
It's an odd one, isn't it?
it is, and I don't understand what any of that process would be like. I don't understand what the mental anguish has to
It must be
go
horrible.
through.
Yeah.
So, I don't think that detransitioners, just to summarize, I don't think that detransitioners are a good argument for denying people to transition at all, but they are also people that need looking after. They're also people that need their own allies, but that should not create a battleground where we fight over the rights of trans people. They are people.
No.
They deserve rights. Let's just give it to them.
And I should add as well, Matt, it's really important is that the regret rates are extremely low for those that
Yes.
do transition. And if you compare that with other surgeries, there's no comparison really, So gender affirming care, people who are trans like me, it's essential. And I think that there's no regret in regard to all of the operations I've had,
Okay.
not at all.
What sustainability programs will also be good. One very specific example: there was a trans person in the recent series of Doctor Who. I thought that was great, etc. I thought the writing around that particular episode was a little bit shit and weak, but yes, let's celebrate that a trans person was at least represented. Let's see more of that. There have been other TV programs I've seen which found better representation of trans people. I welcome that. What other things can we as society do? What can people who wish to be allies do in terms of lobbying or requests, or just making a positive representation of trans people in society?
I mean, it's a big question. I think that good representation where it's fair. Like, for example, I remember that crazy series called Baby Reindeer, and there was a trans woman in that, and she got a lot of
Yes.
abuse, didn't she? But actually, she was the more sane person amongst all what was going on, wasn't she? And there's
Yes, that
also
was a good series. I did enjoy that one.
it was pretty crazy. I think there was also Heartstopper. You got Yasmin, I'm trying to think of her second name, not doing it justice, where she's a trans girl at school and she has relationships, and it's kind of, that kind of really was, I thought, quite groundbreaking. So I love stuff like that, and I love representation. What can we do about? I think, for example, so say you get somebody who's gender critical, and or an organization says like, well, okay, it becomes like apartheid. Let's imagine apartheid with toilets. So I hate the toilet thing, the bathroom thing. But it could be, couldn't it, that they say, well, okay, trans women can't use the female toilets. But if all the female women said, the cis women said, but we're just gonna, you can, and it's fine, and there's no problem. Then I think it's about sometimes having to go against and protest, isn't it? Really.
Yeah.
I think that we could, we can write to the government. I don't think the government really listen, do they? To us mere proletariats here, really. But I think that I think if there's a protest on, go to it. There'll be lots of protests. Stand there. We need cis allies to stand with us. Like my husband stood with me, my roller derby team stood with me, my good friends stood with me. All to support me, which is
Yeah.
fantastic. And it feels that I
Yeah.
think it's a support issue. I always say with support, I'm okay. Without support, I'm not.
Yeah.
And my work have been really good like that. And they supported me. They saw me cry on Wednesday and sent me home and just said after the ruling. And I said to my manager, look, as long as I'm supported, I'm okay. So I think the key thing as allies, what we must do is always be supportive. Realize that actually, for the last 5 days, I've woken up and remembered that court ruling happened,
Yeah.
and it's just in a way, it's like a bad dream but it's not a dream, So for me, it's losing my legal sex after having it for 20 years I just thought that would never happen. So
I know
I'm
that
just
must be really,
devastated by it.
yeah, and it's okay for me to, or it's not okay for me to just sit here as a cis white male in my privileged middle class position and go, I have no idea what that's like. Why should I care? But I should care.
Yeah, that's the
I
difference.
should
If you
care.
care, stand up, say to people, look, don't let somebody, if you see someone being abused, do something about it. Call it out. It's not okay. This
Yeah.
isn't a license to abuse people like me, who have really just been victims all our lives, haven't we? Really, from something or another, and it's just another thing to be a victim to, isn't it?
Yes. Absolutely. I did have a question, but it's jumped straight out of my mind. This is what happens when you get past 50, I'm afraid.
I know that feeling.
I clearly need my lunch. So I guess that's wrapped up here, Lauren. We will talk again. At least I hope we will talk again.
Yeah, I'd
this
love
will
to.
be out onto the feed in a couple of days. It's a pleasure to talk to you, Lauren. I am so pleased that now that I know you better than I used to, now we can have conversations that are constructive and productive, and they're not filtered through a shitty screen of prejudice that happened 20 plus years ago. I am very pleased about that. Listeners, if you have questions, if you have thoughts, reasonpress@gmail.com, or if you're seeing this on the YouTube channel, if that's where it ends up, comment below. Thoughts, ideas, if you're a trans person or a trans ally and you've got ideas on way that we can be better people, please put them down there. It'll be absolutely delightful to have those kinds of things. If you're just going to say something obnoxious, just piss off. We're not interested in those comments. This is going to be a positive thing, please. And until next time, be more trans.
Thank you.